Wishing everybody a great afternoon and thanking you for attending the Vrakas Blum Computer Consulting monthly webinar series, today featuring scanning automation. My name is Kelly Bergman, and I'd like to quickly address just a few housekeeping items before I hand the floor off to our amazing presenter. All attendees are in listen-only mode. As we go along, you can type your questions. There should be a little Q&A portion on the bottom of your screen there, or in the chat section, whichever works for you. We'll be monitoring them both. This is being recorded, and we will post this on our website within the next couple days. Now, with that done, it's my pleasure to introduce Kristen Baumgartner, Sales and Consulting Specialist with Vrakas Blum. You may all remember Kristen from her webinar Multi-Bin earlier this year, or you may have had the pleasure to deal with her face-to-face on a demo for any of our warehouse solutions. Either way, Vrakas Blum is lucky to have her as part of the family. And now, before I go on and on about how great she is, I'm going to hand the floor off to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thanks everybody for joining us this afternoon. Really appreciate your time, want to make the most of it. So we're going to be focusing on an educational presentation regarding scanning and how that applies to your Sage 100 system. First and foremost, I always like to start out with an agenda. So we're going to take a peek at what we're going to cover. As we go through this, please feel free to use your Q&A box. So if you have questions, type them in. We'll make sure that we'll get them addressed as well. So we're going to be focusing on why is it important to automate? Why is this even a conversation? A lot of us have that call from our supervisor or our boss that says, hey, we need to look at automating. Well, that can mean a lot of different things. What's the benefit of it? So we're going to give a brief recap on why this can be important. We're also going to talk about barcodes. And I call this section, I have a barcode, now what? Because most of us will be approached by saying, oh, we get these barcodes, how can we leverage them? Well, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what the barcodes mean, where you can be putting them, how you're going to be capturing them. We're going to talk about what scanning automation is. So we obviously know how to manipulate our Sage environments, how to do those manual entries. We understand that you can scan a barcode. We've all gone to the grocery store and see how that's possible. But what is actually scanning automation as it applies to your Sage 100 system? We're going to talk what's right. Now, I want to be totally candid here. Scanning isn't a right fit for everybody, but being educated and knowing if the business is growing, knowing what those parameters that we look for to determine is it right to make a move into scanning, that's what we're going to focus on. And finally, those questions that you type in the chat box, we're going to be able to answer those for you live. So again, if there's something that you've got questions about, we'll definitely get that addressed for you. So we're going to launch with our first topic, which is why do we want to automate? And primarily, it's going to fall into three buckets for any organization. And they're pretty simple, but specifically for Sage, we're focused on control and visibility, simplifying and streamlining the process, and reducing our operating costs. Now, control and visibility, we all know as we use our Sage 100 systems, it's a very robust accounting system, but it does require a lot of manual data entry, because you can track and get visibility to what you can only see, which means we need to be validating. We need to be getting real-time information. We want to have the organization have one platform, not an outside spreadsheet, not something that someone's filling in to find our serials, our lots, our inventory level. We also want to talk about simplifying and streamlining a process. At no point am I ever going to be an advocate of making something more complicated than it needs to be. We know that we have employees, a lot of them are rock stars out on the floor, but we don't want to shake up their world too much. We don't want to make something so cumbersome or difficult that it's impossible for them to do it. But we still want to give them the opportunity to capture this information so we can use it, again, for that control and visibility. Doing it from the floor also does take a significant chunk of time out of that manual data entry. So that's that kind of eliminating duplicate data entry efforts. Instead of someone who would normally be getting paperwork and entering this into Sage, that person's role will most often turn into a reviewing role, where instead of doing all of that keystroke entry, you're now actually just making sure that everything looks right before posting and updating your Sage registers. We also do this to reduce costs. Now, the big bucket there is that if we've got two people basically doing the same job, somebody writing it down on the floor and another person keying it into Sage, we're paying two people for the same information. That's one of the big cost reductions. It also helps, these types of solutions with automation also helps because when we have issues, we have inventory stocking points where we don't necessarily always trust our inventory, but we got to place a purchase. Maybe we're ordering too much or too little and having to push rush charges to get items to our locations. This is really where that reduction of cost gives you better information to make better decisions in the process as well. So a lot of us nowadays have barcodes on our items, right? If we're selling anything, we're working with any physical, tangible items in Sage, a lot of our vendors are sending them and there's barcode information on it, whether it's a UPC or one of their labels. We have a barcode, now what do we do with it? The first thing I want to talk about is knowing the difference between what is referred to as a 1D or a 2D, or referred to as compound barcode. Now, the first example is a 1D, and this represents a single piece of information. So if I were to scan this barcode, this human readable format below, this is actually what it would produce. A number sign, the number 1, manufacturing, the dash, everything is captured within this one scan. Now, these are super popular, right? These QR codes or 2D codes, we see these a lot. Well, what do they actually mean? Well, in order to explain that, we're actually going to jump over and create one. So again, if we're talking about a single barcode, so this is a 1D barcode, and this is just a free website, you guys can feel free to jot this down. You can actually play and design your own barcodes in this website. So let's say I wanted to make one, and I'm going to kiss up to Kelly here, and we're going to call one Kelly Rocks. It's as simple as entering the information and then just generating the barcode. And this barcode that's been produced now has this specific information in it. I don't recommend doing this if you want to barcode your inventory because you are relying on somebody to manually enter this information and not make any mistakes. You still need to take this, export it, put it into label formats. It's not the easiest way to do it, but it's a fun website that you can kind of test out the size of your barcodes, what it might look like. Now, if we jump over to the QR code generator, I want to show you what this looks like. Again, I'm going to type in that same exact information. So we're going to put in that Kelly Rocks, and I'm going to create that QR code. So what it's going to generate for me is this specific dot matrix actually reads this information within the barcode. Well, that's really cool. But what's interesting about compound barcodes is where I would have to continue to get that barcode in the right size to be able to use it. The QR codes are always in a square format, which means I could say that Kelly Rocks, will say she is awesome. Okay, we'll say that she has a dog, right? All of these pieces of information, when I create this QR code, are actually being put into that code. So I can actually create compound pieces within one barcode. I can use this by dashes, by colons, by other special indicators. But basically, when you're looking at this type of coding, it can have more than a single piece of information. It can have several pieces. A lot of people ask me, well, Kristen, does this work with barcode scanning in Sage 100? And the answer is we have to look at these individual codes. The reason for that is that sometimes there might be information that we don't want in our Sage system. Maybe this is our item number in our lot, but perhaps this is an expiration date information we're not tracking. So we want to be able to do what's called parsing of the barcode. We have to identify how our information is broken apart and how and what we want to capture into our Sage tables. This can become a little tricky and will often require custom development because, guys, I just added a bunch of information into this barcode. Here's the scary thing. Anybody can add any information they want to these barcodes. These types of QR codes, when they're compound, there are a couple varieties that do have some stringent rules, but most do not, which means that when you get these barcodes, these QR codes, they can have any information and some of it may not be important to you or your business at all. So it's important to know which type of barcodes we're talking about using. Simply stated, for the Sage 100 the Sage 100 platform, I recommend using 1D barcodes. It's nice to do a single scan and get all the information in one shot, but Sage itself is set up to run on individual fields. Sometimes this type of scanning is the quicker way to get implemented. QR codes are possible, but it usually takes a little bit of custom programming to get there. So next thing, we have a barcode. Where should it go? This is when I help customers implement these types of solutions is one of our big questions. Now, most of us are going to think, just like when we go to the grocery store, I want a barcode on all of my items. I'm a big advocate of that because that helps identify that specific item. So think about, we have two boxes. They have two wildly different products in them. No pictures on the outside, maybe just a barcode and a description, but the boxes look exactly the same. They're the same size. How do I know quickly which item is which? If we have a barcode on that item, it makes it almost foolproof to grab the wrong item. If we're using it for a manufacturing process, we're looking to do shipment and make sure that the customer is getting the right item. But you also have to take into consideration, if your vendors aren't barcoding them, if you have to add a label, how much time does that take? How much money will that cost to get printers, to get label stock, and then paying an employee to barcode all of those items? So sometimes customers might have items that are in specific areas all the time. And those items, because we do so much volume with them, we just barcode the shelves. The items are a little bit easier to identify from each other. And when we have and we grab an item, we want to use it again for a bill of materials assembly or issue it to a work ticket, we can take it right from that shelf and use the barcode that's on the shelf. Some customers I work with get items in that there's no possible way you could put a barcode on them. Either the material they're made out of doesn't lend itself to hold a barcode actually on it because there might be a gum residue, or there's a finish we don't want to ruin by putting any kind of adhesive on it. Some customers will get huge VAT deliveries or trucks or tanker loads. You can't well, you could barcode an entire truck, but that kind of seems pointless. Sometimes we'll have books or computer stations set up with a barcode sheet. Think about maybe the last time you went to a home improvement store like Menards or Home Depot. Sometimes when you bring items up, either they're too small to have a barcode on it, or perhaps they're too large, or it's lumber. It's something we don't want to have a barcode on. A lot of times when you're checking out, they'll open up a book or a binder and they'll flip through to the right section and scan that barcode. That's another option for customers that don't necessarily need to barcode every single item. We also see barcodes that will be on your Sage forms. Now, it is possible, especially if you have someone who's very familiar with the crystal reports within Sage, adding a barcode to any form is extremely easy. It's actually just taking what's already there, that information in human readable form, like maybe your PO number, your sales order number, even your items, and creating another field. But that field, instead of being in your font within your crystal form that you're used to reading, you actually change that font to what's called Azalea B in Sage 100. This will translate the information in that field into a barcode for you. So again, if you're familiar with crystal reports, that's something you can do yourself. If you needed help, again, the Vrakas team would be happy to help you with that kind of addition. But again, when we talk about barcodes, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Not all items will run the same way. You really want to think through, if I start doing barcode scanning, where does it make sense for my people to be grabbing those barcodes from? Now, once we have a barcode in place, we need a way to read it. So one of the most popular ways that a lot of customers will start out with is what is called a wedge scanner. And during our demo presentation today, this is called a Zebra LS2208. This is the exact model I will be using in our demo. It is a USB, which means it's corded. It's plugged in directly to your computer that's running Sage 100, and it instantly becomes an outside keyboard that can read a barcode scan. So as we go into a Sage field and we want to track a serial number, if that serial number is on our item, we can bring that item to a station and we can scan that particular barcode and capture it instantly. This is a simple way to start out. These devices are usually on the lowest end of the price point. So it's a nice way that you can start leveraging barcodes, even if you're not ready for full barcode automation. When we talk about going into barcode automation, we're going to see devices that often look like this. So a lot of us still have this picture in our head of these kind of intermech type devices. This is actually a Zebra-based device, but something that had a pistol grip on it. It was really rugged and heavy and a little oversized, external keyboard, right? This is what a lot of us think of when we think about introducing barcode scanning. These devices, candidly, are amazing workhorses. They can do long-range scanning, so that can be super helpful as well. But honestly, a lot of customers are starting to move to using these types of devices, which this one in particular is called a TC21. This is something that employees immediately gravitate towards. It's basically like using a smartphone. In this day and age, almost everybody has an iPad, some type of tablet, a smartphone, right? Anybody besides my mother out there still rocking a flip phone? I don't know. But most everybody is going to be super comfortable with these devices. So when you talk about adding automation, this is not foreign for an employee. They go, oh, it's a phone. I just point and scan with it. Now, the benefits of these kind of devices is that they do have that integrated barcode reader. And we want to use something that really does have a laser read on a barcode. Candidly, guys, one big reason. Whenever we're picking items, we cannot guarantee that all the light levels in a warehouse, in a manufacturing floor, have the same intensity. So if you were using something that had a camera option on it, that camera has to take a picture of it. It has to translate the picture of it. It has to make sure there's enough light that it can actually get a clear reading of it. And then it translates that information and can bring it in to be utilized. A laser barcode reader does that all in one step. It recognizes it, it illuminates it, it reads it, and it brings all the information directly in. So again, camera apps are possible, but I often recommend that we're looking for something that has an integrated scanner with it. So what are the benefits? What are we talking about? What actually is scanning automation? And I hate to do this to you guys, but we have to talk about what it isn't first to really understand. Obviously, we know a lot of us started in Sage 100 with no scanning, which means that when we're talking about paperwork, we're talking about we're receiving items, we're writing it down. We're picking an item, we're checking it off that we've picked those items. Everything kind of becomes dependent on paperwork because that's our communication tool. Paperwork, again, we know can get lost. We know that I wish everybody's handwriting was amazing. Mine in particular is not. So sometimes we are subjected to reading other people's handwriting. And that can be tricky. Is that a 1? Is that a 7? This is important when we're talking about serial numbers, item numbers, even physical counts. We need to make sure that that information is clearly communicated. We also are going to see an information delay because somebody has to perform the work, write it down, hand it in, even if they're doing it themselves, if they're going to a station themselves and entering it, they still need to take that time to be done to go to the station and then key in the information. So when you're talking about something that is no scanning automation whatsoever, you're dependent on paperwork, you've got information delays. And again, this might be what we're used to. And we've got really great systems around this. And again, this is just an illustration of how we get to scanning automation. If you're here right now and the process is strong, I'm not going to be in there trying to talk you out of it. Now, next step up is when we talk about scanning directly into Sage 100. This becomes less dependent on paperwork. So instead of writing it down, we could just be bringing items to, let's say, a cart with a laptop and Wi-Fi on it. We could be scooting that cart around to our different items as they're unloaded from trucks. This means that we can capture information directly into our Sage environment. We still might have occasions where we're going to write stuff down on paperwork. Maybe that's going to be something we're still going to keep. We're going to keep that packing list from our vendor on file just to cross-reference against our purchase order. But we stop becoming so dependent on it because we can capture information a lot quicker directly into Sage. Now, one of the key components with this is you need access to a computer. So you have to have something out on the floor where you're either bringing items to a computer or have Wi-Fi points out on the floor where you can bring the computer to your items. There's also what we consider is called limited validation. And this really is one of the key components when we're talking about true scanning automation. Validation is really guaranteeing that the information that we're collecting is correct per what we've entered in Sage. I'll give you an example. We have a sales order, and that sales order says that that customer has ordered 3 of your item. If we were scanning into Sage and we were shipping this out, we could say, you know what, I shipped this many to the customer. Maybe it was 2, maybe it was 4. And Sage will allow, if your settings are in place, for those kinds of changes. They will allow something to be under order, over order. Sage will also allow for substitutions or changes, right? That's just one example here, but it's not necessarily 100% stopping a user. It's not saying, did you get it right? It's saying, yes, I've accepted the information that you've entered into the Sage environment. When we talk about automation, it really gives us the benefits of all of this scanning into Sage, along with the validation. Now, automation can absolutely omit all paperwork on your floor. I'm going to be totally upfront. I don't usually recommend that if you're just starting out with a project. Employees are used to their paperwork. They may not have to write on it anymore, but they kind of like that as a flag, as an indicator. I've got something to do. This is kind of familiar and kind of new. It makes it easier to get to an all paperless kind of environment, but usually we're going to see a baby step there. So it can omit all paperwork, but it doesn't have to. Nothing in scanning automation is ever handwritten, because in automation, you're actually collecting the information that's right in front of you. It can be scanned, it can be typed in, you can do lookups, but you're entering it directly at that time. Scanning automation will also typically involve a mobile device. It can be a computer station. I want to be totally candid about that. So we can use fixed point terminals if necessary, but a lot of the time we're going to see mobile devices come into place, primarily because it makes it super easy for stuff like physical counts. I did work in distribution houses. I have done lots of physical counts, both handwritten and on computers with carts. Not necessarily the funnest experience in the world. Well, physical counts never really are, but it is not really intended to kind of scoot a computer around with you all through a warehouse. Having a mobile device does make it much easier. You also get that complete feeling of validation. So with a scanning automation tool, not only do you abide by the SAGE rules that you have set up, you actually can control what specific employees can and cannot do on the floor. And that is based on the SAGE rules, but then you expand it to the individuals. Meaning, let's say I have an employee, he's been with me forever, he knows the process front and back, and he runs my physical counts. And he's amazing. He's got no problems whatsoever. He's going to do this for me forever and ever. But something happens. He gets pulled out of office for a couple of weeks, and it's during my physical count time. I bring an intern in. It's his nephew, another great kid, but he's not as familiar as what his uncle has been doing. In this scenario, perhaps I want to put in restricted parameters, right? Maybe the uncle was allowed to do physical counts, receiving, shipping. It didn't matter. He knew it all. But for his nephew, perhaps we want to focus more on, you know what, you're just doing physical counts. I want you to scan each barcode as you go through the process, because maybe, I'm sure you count well, but I don't want you cheating it. Automation gives you another level of control with that complete validation feel. So again, while we go through this process, I want you to be thinking, where do I fit in this equation? Is this something that really speaks to me where I'm not scanning now and I'm happy and everything works great? Is it show me what scanning in a Sage 100 could look like? Or is it we've grown, we really do have maybe some turnover in staff, we really need to get a lot more control going with scanning automation? So I do like my PowerPoint presentations, but nothing speaks to me more than actually showing you what this looks like. So we're going to go into a demonstration of what the three processes look like. Now, number one, guys, I'm going to be totally upfront. This is going to be over exaggerated, but we do want to address certain issues that we're going to see, certain things that we can see on a day-to-day basis with these different types of transactions, the pluses and the minuses of them. Let me pull up my Sage environment. Now, for our presentation today, what I did do is I created actually a couple purchase orders for us. Be totally upfront. All the purchase orders are exactly the same quantities, the same items. What we're doing is we're showing the difference between what these types can look like. Number one, we're going to focus on what it looks like to do this manually in Sage, which I apologize. That means you guys are going to have to watch me type. Now, for illustration purposes, I'm also going to be terrible. I'm going to bring up a time clock. And what we're going to do is we're going to time each of these processes to see, again, what the benefits could be. As I mentioned, we're going to go into an over-exaggerated situation. So please bear with me as we go through this. So first one, I'm going to go ahead and perform a receipt of goods. This is going to be the same purchase order, okay? Not same exact purchase order, a copy, same exact quantities, same exact items. This is going to be done, like I said, without scanning, with scanning, and with scanning automation. First scenario, I get actually a packing list from my vendor, and I wait for someone to write down the information and hand it into my desk so I can do my receipt of goods entry. So we're going to go ahead and start this clock. First thing I'm going to do for my receipt of goods entry is I'm actually going to be creating my batch. So I have to create a new batch. I can label it if I want to, go ahead and hit accept. And now I have my purchase order. Okay. So I've got my particular packing list for my vendor has my PO on it. So I'm going to look at that and we're going to say, okay, so this PO number was KB623-1. Okay. Well, this is my receipt number. I've already made a mistake. So I need to cancel that out. So I will. Let me create a receipt number and link it to my purchase order. Geez, guys, Kristen and her fat fingers. It's like she doesn't ever type in Sage. It's almost like she's always doing automation. I don't have my invoice number yet because we just received our goods. So the vendor's going to send me that for a couple of days. Yep, this is my vendor. Everything looks great. Their address looks good. Okay, so here's my lines. Now I am being prompted if I want to receive complete for this particular purchase order. You're also going to notice I've got bin location set up here. I did not enable bins, but I'm going to go ahead and say no, there is not going to be any multi-bin tracking here, but this is a possibility. Wanted to keep it simple for our processes. I have a couple different items here. So my first one is actually my Vrakas koozie. It's going to be, or no, these are actually my pens. I'm coming in here. I ordered 250. They wrote down 250. All right, that looks good. These are my Vrakas koozies. I love these, and the customers go nuts for these. And oh, it looks like we either did some adjustment or something. We got 60 of these guys. Now, this item is lotted, so I'm going to get a distribution triangle. All right, well, I got to get the lots in there. So let me go ahead and make sure that I have that lot number. And I've got 202106222. And oh, okay, so there's 40 that came in under that lot. And we've got 2021063. Okay, so there's the remaining, got that in. All right, so going to my last item. I got both of them. This item is set up as a serial. So again, okay, I gotta get that serial number in there. So I'm going to go over, I'm going to bring in my serial number distribution. And let's see, the first one, oh geez, 06231X JF P. Wait, hey, Kelly, you wrote down the serial number. Is this a 1 or an I? Well, no, I can't guess. It's a serial number. I need to get it entered into Sage. Well, can you check for me? Yeah, we got 2 of them. It's the one that's 1XJF. All right, thank you. All right, so that was a I that was actually on there, H78. Okay, so there's my first one, and 06231 QURI 885. Okay, so now I got that entered. Excellent, everything looks good. I can go ahead and accept that and move on. Now, I want you guys to notice, we put about 3 minutes on the clock. Now, I, of course, was being silly. I had some things in there. I made mistakes. I had to double check with somebody. There are things that can happen in a normal processing where we do have to hold this and we do have to make sure that the information's right because we're eventually going to post this into our environment. Now, everybody, I'm hoping everybody, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor, is familiar with receipt of goods entry. I specifically use this because no matter who we are, we usually are receiving items in, okay? Now, there's some may be on the phone that have never seen receipt of goods entry. Maybe you're not necessarily somebody who's processing data. You maybe run the production floor or you are the CFO. Did you know that it takes all those steps to actually create a receipt of goods entry against that particular purchase order? So again, it's kind of why we wanted to flag this out. Let's go ahead and let's change this just a touch. And let's change this into if we're scanning with Sage or scanning directly into Sage. So I'm going to reset our clock here. And this time I'm going to start directly from the beginning. So I'm going to close this out and we're going to do a new receipt of goods entry. So let me go ahead. And like I said, we're going to create that new batch number. We'll go ahead and accept that. And I'm going to create my new receipt number. But first, let's get that clock going. All right, so I now have created my new receipt number. In this scenario, I've actually printed my purchase order and I have that PO barcoded. So that beep you just heard was me scanning the barcode. So I've pre-populated this information. I can go ahead, yep, that's the right one. That's my vendor. Check my address, everything looks great. Okay, I still get prompted, okay, when I'm doing this. I'm gonna say no again, right? We're not gonna default everything in. And I'm going to say, all right, so I got 250 of those. That's cool. And this one, same scenario. I got 60. So I can tab off that field and, ooh, okay, I got my distribution. So let me do some distribution here. I've got a lot number. So I actually had 2 of them. So I scan that really quick and I got 40 of that first one. And I'm going to scan my second lot number. Ooh, this is going a lot faster, huh? Scanning directly in. I'm going to take that last item, say we got 2. And again, my distribution for my serial numbers. So we'll go ahead and we'll say, all right, I'm going to scan in those serial numbers. So let me scan that in and I'll scan in the second one. Uh-oh, what did I do? Oh, no. Okay. So I have to scan the serial number and then I have to distribute and get off that line. Okay, now I can scan the second serial number. You look good. Okay, great. And now we go ahead, review it. Everything looks good. We can hit accept and we can bring that in. Now, for again, anybody that's familiar with that process, does that look like it helps you a little bit? Because I'm using barcodes for the lot and the serial information now. It also helped identify my purchase order number. So I don't have to look it up, key it in, type it in, make a mistake. But you are still tabbing and moving through the Sage field. You have to make sure you're on the right field. You have to make sure your cursor's in the right prompt. But this is just done with a wedge scanner and a computer station. We could be having that computer on a mobile cart. So maybe those serials I was scanning, I have my computer right next to the item. Perhaps it takes a little bit longer because I've had to bring those items to my station and drop them off. I could also be doing the counts if I'm right by the items, or maybe I still use that packing list or that vendor bill of lading that was sent to me. And I wrote down, okay, I counted these off, but I'm going to capture some of the information in barcodes. But again, I want you guys to look at the clock. We have an impact of time here. The scanning did help us, even with a couple of mistakes in the process. What we're going to move on to is actually being able to look at what barcode scanning in an automation field looks like. Now, before we get started with this, I want to confirm with everybody, I am going to be using this Scanco-based Warehouse 100 software. Now, this software is meant to be integrated in your Sage environment. This is an additional product that we're adding in. So let me go ahead. I will close out this receipt of goods. And I'm also going to be what's called airplaying my device. I'm running this software live on an iPad mini. So I can, just to show you, close out of my application. This is on an iOS-based device. It can be also an Android device or even a computer station, but we're going to focus on the mobile devices. Now, when running this software, I want to be very candid. I do have, even on an iOS device, an integrated barcode reader. So as I go through this process, I am scanning barcodes. Now, just to show you, let's bring that time clock up. We want to make sure that we're capturing all of our information here, and we want to be fair. So I'm going to reset our clock, and let's go ahead and get started. So first thing I'm going to do is hit the receiving icon. I want to receive by order. I'm going to take and create a new batch, just like my system prompted me for. I'm going to bring in my order number, which is barcoded. I'm going to bring in my items. So let me get a validation. So I'm just scanning my barcode on my item. I'm going to say I did my count. I did 250 of them, got those all. Going on to my next item, which is my can koozie, which is lotted. So I can say I got that lot and I got 40 of those, because remember, we're receiving 60. I'm going to bring back to that item because we've got more of that lot. I can say, you know what, there's my second lot and I got 20 of those. So we're going to get an over receipt. Yes, I'm sure. I know I'm receiving more than I ordered. I'm going to say, all right, take that last item that is our serialized item, scan that in, and I need to capture those 2 serial numbers. So there's 1, change my count to 1, there's my count to 2, I'm all done, and I send that information in. Now, I went extremely fast through that, okay? But I want you guys to note the clock. It is quicker than being able to scan into Sage, but where's the additional benefit? Well, I've set my information in, so I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to flip back to the Sage environment. And I want to point out something to you guys. Previously, anybody that is keying in or scanning in this information is having to do this usually after someone else has already done the initial count. Somebody someplace has already checked it in. Perhaps it is you, but in that second scenario of scanning direct into Sage, I would still need to be doing my counts, double checking it, and then doing my entry. This was all done on the floor in real time. Now, that person who would normally have to scan or key in information, when I go to my receipt of goods entry, I want to show you how this looks different. Instead of creating a batch, remember I created one from the scanner. So what I'm looking for is this third batch I created. I'm going to hit accept. I'm going to look at this particular item. And again, I have, apologize here, my receipt number's already been created. My lines have already been created. My serial numbers are already in. My lot numbers are already in the system. This role has now changed from entry into reviewing. All of this was captured with a handheld scanner out on the floor in about a minute's time. Now, I did go super fast, so let's go and talk about a little bit more about that validation. So we're going to go back to my handheld scanner. I actually knew I was going to be going fast. I was kind of being a jerk there, guys. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to slow down. I'm going to show you what this looks like in a slower mode. Now, batches, if you're using them in Sage, they will translate out to the handheld. You never need to know what a batch number is if you're using the handheld. This hashtag up here will actually reach out to Sage and grab the next available batch number for you. The order number can be scanned in. I scanned it really quick, but another point of validation is that I can actually type in information, or by using the magnifying glass, I can do a lookup, and it will show me all of my available purchase orders as well. I created one more for us just to be able to walk through this process. Here, I'm being asked for the item. Now, I went through and scanned the items spot on every single time, knew the counts, knew the quantities, and just kicked it down the road. I want to show you validation. So here, if I'm bringing in this particular item, it's a valid item in my system, but it wasn't on this particular purchase order. So if you're getting multiple deliveries at the same time, you're still going to be receiving the right items to the right orders. The employee also has the ability to do lookups at this point. This is really helpful for being on the floor. If I was actually counting out all of these items, it will show me what's been ordered, what I've received so far, and what's still unreceived. So as a working to-do list, I never have to stop and recount. So let's say I'm taking my pens and I have a pallet of pens, right? Maybe it's not a box of 250. We're calling it a pallet of pens. And I get 50 of them on that first pallet. I can then continue on and keep receiving that pen, right? Especially if we've got barcodes from our vendors, they've already barcoded the package. This device is telling me how many I already have. I don't have to keep doing the math here. I can just see it really quickly. I'm also able, if I use that lookup, to see what's going on in process. I now have 100 of them. I'm still waiting on these other 2 items. This is what we're talking about validation for help for employees on the floor. Again, because it's an Android app or an iOS app, it's not really difficult for employees to pick this up and learn it. When you're prompted for information in Sage, I had to tab around to get to the right field. These fields are already pre-populating and highlighting for us. So anytime we see something that's red, it's a prompt. It wants information in it. I can skip around. So let's say I go to my serial item, right? And I'm going to scan a serial number. This one's important. I want to show you guys. Instead of entering I received 2 and then capturing each of the serial numbers, let's say that this is one of my serial numbers here. I can just scan it and it's changing my counts as I go. Maybe I haven't found the other serialized number yet. So I'm going to go back to item, touch an item, and I can say, you know what? I'm going on to those lotted can koozies. This offers a lot of flexibility with still allowing employees to do the job that they're already doing. They're just writing it down instead. So we've now changed that time for the entry in Sage. We've now given the employee the ability to capture what's really happening. And now the person within Sage is reviewing the information. As I mentioned, we used actually receipt of goods because that's a pretty common transaction. But think about how this might impact your work ticket entry. Being able to actually send information into the system that might reflect your statuses, your parts issued. If you're issuing in actual time parts with lots or serials, right? If you're picking and you want to say these items are picked and now reserved for certain customers, all of this automation starts to tie together so everything becomes real time and you're still getting validation and control for your employees and what they're doing. Something else interesting here is that if I were to just collect this information, I could send it in. I can also set up prompts for employees. So if something was incomplete or we didn't want over receipt on the floor, I can lock down those permissions as well. So again, automation is an extremely strong tool. It is meant to streamline and simplify the process. The software is designed so employees can use it really easily, and you're getting the information and putting the funds that you're paying your people in the right places so that, again, you're not duplicating up on data entry. That is my spiel, and I'm sticking to it, but not quite done yet. We did talk about how do we tell what might be right for you in your organization. So this is really, really generalized. I want to be totally upfront. There are times where you might fall into certain categories, even though this is a general example, that might still be a prompt. But I want to talk through kind of the different buckets when we talk about automation, kind of the key indicators. So if you're processing less than 20 Sage 100 transactions a day, that means doing item receipts, issues, receipt of goods, sales order processing, work ticket transactions. Just anytime you have to sit down and do a transaction within Sage, there's usually an automation that's going to help in that process. If you're doing less than 20 a day, I got to be honest, I don't see a real huge need for that kind of automation. Usually, if you're doing that volume, you also don't really need real-time inventory. And if you do, you're pretty much close to doing that because usually those transactions, because there's so few, are being performed by supervisors. So you're still getting them done pretty quickly and done in the system. You're not really tracking lots or serials, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. That's based on your valuation within Sage for that item. If you're a manufacturer, you're front and or back flushing materials and labor. Acceptable shipment accuracy levels. Okay, nobody likes customers who are unhappy with the products that they get. Lord knows it's happened to me before. Thank you, Amazon. But if you're really good, if your employees know what they're doing and they're shipping out the right items to your customers, again, this is an area where we're categorizing that first bucket. And items, this is important too, are easily identified on site, which means that we don't have confusion with items, whether we're picking them, we're using them for manufacturing processes, or we are shipping them out. So which method is right in this category? I think we all know where we're going, but I'm going to bring my magic 8-ball in, give it a little shimmy shake. And this is a situation where scanning would not necessarily be needed for this particular type of customer, okay? And it's very valid if you are in this bucket. Scanning may not be a need, but as you continue to grow, it might be something you're curious about expanding into. So next level up, you're processing those kind of 20 to 75 Sage 100 transactions a day. It's kind of a little bit of a pain. If someone's manually entering those, they're usually not too excited about it. It's usually the teeth grinding portion of their day. Still, real-time inventory is not super critical. We are tracking a lot of serial inventory, but it might just be a few product lines or special items. Again, we're probably manufacturing and we've either got a front flush or back flush on our labor and materials. You're also going to see an additional characteristic where your floor personnel are familiar with Sage data entry. You're going to have still acceptable shipment accuracy levels, and items, again, are pretty easily identified on site. Now, this floor personnel are familiar with Sage is because not everybody is. So when you're looking at our next level, which I'm sure you can guess, but Magic 8-ball, tell me what it is that where scanning could help with a wedge scanner, not necessarily automation, but in capturing some of this information, this point becomes pretty important because sometimes we can teach people how to do the Sage transactions, but if they're already familiar with them, adding a scanning wedge into what they're already doing from that transactional floor standpoint makes it super easy. Of course, our last bucket, we have massive transactions a day. We absolutely need real-time inventory. We can't wait, we can't delay. They got to get in, they got to be issued to jobs. We're tracking a lot of serial information, usually a lot of it, so we want to make sure that we're accurate and quick with it. Manufacturing is tracked with actuals. So if you've ever considered tracking actual labor, not budgeted or backflushed labor, if you've actually started to play with, you know what, I want to see my actual inventory levels when I am issuing parts to work tickets. Again, if you were doing lot or serial tracked components, that's huge. Floor personnel are not familiar with Sage. So we don't necessarily want to invest the time or additional Sage licenses with training those people on the floor. We're having problems with shipment accuracy. That's another key trigger. And again, when our items look similar and are easily confused, this barcode automation, as I'm sure you guessed, but Magic 8 Ball tell me true, this is something where you might have a scanning need. This is something that if you wanted to have a conversation, look at your specific situation, figure out what might work. But usually it's kind of at this level where we really say this is something that you should really consider doing. So that's my spiel. I'm sticking to it. I do want to thank everybody for their time. We're going to go into questions right now. So Kelly, going to ask, did we get any questions during the presentation?
All right, just a few. Can I use my vendor's barcodes on the packages I received from them, or do I have to print new ones with my part in?
That is a great question and a pretty common one. There is actually functionality within Sage that allows you to leverage a vendor or a general alias. When using aliases with that automation tool or with a scanning wedge within Sage, if the alias is set up in your item maintenance, you can actually scan that barcode and either Sage or the automation that I was showing will translate that part into your part number. So you would not need to reprint any barcodes. You could leverage exactly what the vendor's sending you right now.
How can I barcode my Sage files?
Again, we talked just a little bit about that. That is actually changing the way that the Crystal report is designed. When we look in Sage, we usually have standard forms. You can copy that standard form and make a copy and make some changes if you have the Crystal Designer, if you're familiar with it. It is changing that information into the Sage. It's what's called Azalea B font. It will translate that information into a barcode for you. And again, if that's something that sounds super crazy and you're thinking, Kristen, you just said a bunch of gobbledygook, that's something that Vrakas can help you with as well.
Excellent. And finally, we don't need to use barcodes, but my customers require that on my labels. Is there an easy way to create labels to add to my products?
That is also something we're seeing a lot of, and thank you for that question. I'm going to blame everything on Amazon. Amazon changed everybody's world, and everybody has different requirements and different asks at this point in time. If you have a situation where you don't need to use barcodes internally, but you need to create barcodes on your labels, there are several different options for labeling software. If you are using things like Starship, Starship has the ability to generate barcodes. You can get bartender software and create them, which again is not necessarily directly integrated to Sage. Scanco has some options for being able to generate barcodes in your process. It really depends a little bit on what you're looking for, but adding information to a barcode label, I use that website, guys. I want you to see it's not crazy difficult to get the information in. I would advise looking for a solution that's integrated with your Sage 100 system though, so you don't have to manually key in that information. Remember, streamline, simplify. We want to make this easier, not harder.
Those are all the questions we received.
All right. Well, again, I wanted to thank everybody for their time. After this webinar, there is going to be a question pop-up. It's a survey. It will take you maybe a max of 2-3 minutes. If you're good enough to answer just a couple of feedback questions for our team, actually, Katie and Kelly are going to set you up with some pretty cool Vrakas swag. So if you can answer those questions and just be candid, you can please answer honestly. We'll go ahead and we'll get you. Kelly, what did we have? We had koozies, I think, up that we can share with our team.
Some koozies, some pens. Who knows what we'll be able to come up with.
Yep, not above bribery. Definitely not above bribery.
Not
so
above.
just give us a couple thoughts as to what you thought of today's presentation. So with that, I want to thank everybody again for their time. I'm going to hand it back to Kelly. And again, here's my contact information if you have any questions on anything that's been discussed today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kristen, for getting us through this last hour with such finesse and humor. Love it. And to the attendees, thank you all for joining us for our monthly webinar series. We know your time is valuable. And in closing, should you have any questions, there's Kristen's information. You'll get a follow-up email with the recording and a few other things, and fill out the survey. Thank you all so much and have a great afternoon.